Hello again, and welcome back to HoA on the Go. We are still attempting to learn about the World War II. We started last time, and this is going to start part 2 of World War II. We're going to listen to a couple Charlie Parker tunes from the 40s, probably a little after World War II, but that's all right. I think it fits the atomic age. So let's check that out, and then we'll start the notes. World War II solidified the nation's role as a global power, ushered in social changes, and established reform agendas that would preoccupy public discourse in the United States for the remainder of the 20th century. Women entered into previously male job roles as African Americans, and others struggled to obtain desegregation of the armed forces and end discriminatory practices in hiring, or discriminatory hiring practices. My bad. Minorities' participation in the war. African Americans generally served in segregated military units and were assigned to non-combat roles, but demanded the right to serve in combat rather than support roles, and actually won that. There were some all-minority military units, the Red Tails that you've heard a little bit about, the Tuskegee Airmen, were African Americans. They served in Europe with distinction. And the Nisei regiments, the Asian Americans from Japan, who earned a high number of decorations. In fact, they're the highest decorated regiment in the history of the Army. So pretty important. Additional contributions of minorities. The communication codes of the Navajo were used, made famous in the movie Wind Talkers. Their oral, not written language was impossible for the Japanese or anybody else to break. Mexican Americans also fought, but in non-segregated units, and minority units suffered high casualties and won numerous unit citations and individual medals for bravery in action. So minorities played a big part in the fighting in World War II. The conduct of war often reflects the social and moral codes of a nation. The treatment of prisoners of war often reflects the savage nature of conflict and the cultural norms of a nation. All right, so this is a little propaganda, but that's all right. The Geneva Convention attempted to ensure the humane treatment of prisoners of war by establishing rules to be followed by all nations. The treatment of prisoners of war in the Pacific Theater often reflected the savagery of the fighting there. So you fight somebody, they kill your friend, you kind of want to kill them too. In the Bataan Death March, American POWs suffered brutal treatment by the Japanese after the surrender of the Philippines. And you can see the malnourished soldiers there. Japanese soldiers often committed suicide rather than surrender. The treatment of prisoners of war in Europe more closely followed the ideas of the Geneva Convention. In some ways, yes. Specific groups that are the object of hatred and prejudice often face increased discrimination during wartime. And the obvious piece of evidence here is the Jews in Europe. Just horrible. Terms to note: genocide, the systematic and purposeful destruction of a racial, political, religious, or cultural group. And the final solution: Germany's decision to exterminate all Jews. Again with the commercials. I get killed every time. Who knew that there were this many commercials on Spotify? I did not. All right, there's my email popping up. So let's get back to the notes until the commercial's done. Groups that were affected by the Holocaust: Jews, Poles, Slavs, Gypsies, and then the quote-unquote undesirables, which were homosexuals, the mentally ill, and political dissidents. It's about 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and 13 million total people were killed in the Holocaust. So a lot of Poles and Russians and Gypsies and undesirables were killed in addition to Jews. Significance: in the Nuremberg trials, Nazi leaders and others were convicted of war crimes. The Nuremberg trials emphasized individual responsibility for actions during a war, regardless of orders received. The trials led to an increased demand for a Jewish homeland, and the population of Israel would swell in this time period, leading up to the war and right after the war. The United States' success in the war required the total commitment of the nation's resources. On the home front, public education and the mass media promoted nationalism. The United States government and industry forged a close working relationship to allocate resources effectively. Let's see about the commercial. Rationing was used to maintain supply of essential products to the war effort, similar to World War I. War bonds and income taxes were used for financing the war. Businesses retooled from peacetime to wartime production. For example, car manufacturing to tank manufacturing. So, butter to guns. All right, salt peanuts. Human resources. More women and minorities entered the labor force. Citizens volunteered in support of the war effort. Military resources. The draft, or selective service, was used to provide personnel for the military. Contributions to the war effort came from all segments of society. Women entered into previously male job roles as African Americans and others struggled to obtain desegregation of the armed forces and end discriminatory hiring practices. Women on the home front increasingly participated in the workforce to replace men serving in the military. And the example here is Rosie the Riveter. She is actually right there. Not her, but her, although she is riveting. All right, and typically participated in non-combat military roles. In fact, this is the period of highest industrial production in U.S. history was led by women, so go girls. African Americans on the home front during World War II migrated to cities in search of jobs in war plants and campaigned for victory in war and equality at home. Prejudice, coupled with wartime fears, can adversely affect civil liberties of minorities. Reasons for internment of Japanese Americans. There was a strong anti-Japanese prejudice on the West Coast. And there was a false belief that Japanese Americans were aiding the enemy. And so, as a result of this, we put the Japanese people into camps and held them there. The only way they could get out was if they were second generation, Nisei generation, the Issei are the first generation, and they volunteered to fight for the U.S. Army. Of course, they can only fight in Europe, not in the Pacific Theater. Japanese Americans were relocated to internment camps. Internment affected Japanese American populations along the West Coast. The Supreme Court upheld the government's right to act against Japanese Americans living on the West Coast of the United States. A public apology was eventually issued by the United States government, and financial payment was made to survivors. These people had lost everything. They gave it up, and it was taken by somebody else, usually. And a public apology was eventually issued, I believe, in the 1990s to those interned. During World War II, the media and entertainment industries saw their role as supporting the war effort by promoting nationalism. And you can see these wonderful posters here. You can stop and look at them. They're pretty interesting. Media and communications assistance. The United States government maintained strict censorship of reporting of the war. Public morale and ad campaigns kept Americans focused on the war effort. The entertainment industry produced movies, plays, and shows that boosted morale and patriotic support for the war effort, as well as portrayed the enemy in stereotypical ways. Yeah, there was no Abu Ghraib in World War II. All right, and it seems like that might be it for the home front. So, hope you enjoyed it once again, and talk about it in class. Have a wonderful day.